Hey there, my name's Elijah. Welcome to RPG Feed, and in this flip through, I'm going to be taking a look at Monster of the Week, written by Michael Sands and published by Evil Hat Productions. The kind of elevator pitch that I've heard for Monster of the Week is you're basically playing monster hunters in episodic sessions, kind of like X-Files, Dresden Files, Supernatural, this kind of thing. Even Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I think, is probably a pretty good comparison to the kind of stories that this game encourages. The system itself is PBTA, or Powered by the Apocalypse, so you get a series of playbooks for each type of character you can play, and those playbooks give you a series of moves. And the moves are, in true PBTA fashion, pretty prescriptive, which I found interesting. Coming from an Ironsworn background, I'm kind of used to that, but this does operate quite a bit differently from Ironsworn in play. As far as the look and playability, it's a nice looking book, nothing that's gonna blow your mind necessarily, but the included pieces of art are nice and the layout is very usable. We have some spreads like this with a little bit more flavor, but a lot of it is just nicely formatted text, lists, good heading hierarchy, everything you want in a rule book that's supposed to be easy to read and understand. There are lots of lists of options, but one thing this game is notably missing is rollable tables, which is something I look for as a person who plays solo a lot. I want things I can roll on to get random results, and there just isn't a lot of that here. It does include some mysteries, which is pretty cool. Let me flip to one of those. So here's one that I actually played with my table, page 273. Let's hop over there. Dirty Apes. So here's what a mystery looks like in this game. We have kind of a synopsis of the mystery. We have some requirements. This kind of sets the expectations for the reality and the fiction you're playing within. For instance, this mystery wouldn't make sense in a world where someone couldn't use science to bind souls to like cyborg bodies. So that has to be acceptable in your world in order for that, or for this mystery to make sense for you to play through. We've got a hook, which is going to tell us why our hunters are involved in this situation. And then we've got this countdown, which I do find kind of cool. We may come back to this and talk a little bit more about the mysteries, but we basically have a handful of pages, a couple of threats, and some NPCs, as well as some enemies or potential enemies that you can fight. So there's not a lot to it, but in play, it really was plenty. The only thing that I will say is that the mysteries don't provide a lot of keeper or GM support, in the sense that as someone coming in having never run one of these mysteries before, I was kind of all over the place. I wasn't really sure how to sequence things. So there's no, for instance, map or like encounter list that you can work through as the players do things. It's kind of just a lot of different stuff that you can throw in as it makes sense to do. So I did find that a little bit challenging. Now, as far as lore and setting, it really doesn't establish a lot of setting here. The setting is more implied from the concept of the game and the types of stories that it wants you to tell, as well as from the different character types that you can play. I will say there's a lot of broad flavor, but not a lot of specific flavor. A lot of it's up to you and the world that you want to play in, which is fine with me. I don't mind that. And in fact, being able to improvise or come up with my own things is often easier than remembering things that are prescribed to me in a book. And since there's not a lot of pre-built lore, including there's no like bestiary or anything like that I remember. I may be wrong about that, but I don't remember there being a lot of like pre-made monsters, but they do tell you how to create your own mysteries, which is helpful, and how to create custom threats. So if we go to page 301, let's take a look at that and see what kind of guidance they provide. So threats are not actually monsters. I thought they were, but they don't appear to be monsters. These are actually more like world level or region level threats. But I do think this is helpful, as well as showing you how to prescribe results based on roles for this specific threat. Now, I'm pretty sure there are instructions on creating monsters as well. Let me find those. Yeah, so here are some details on creating your own monsters. Start with the monster. Most mysteries will have just one, the single creature behind everything bad that's going to happen, which is kind of an interesting thing to say. Like, we're not going up against an army of monsters here. Basically, it's Scooby Doo and there's one ghost, and we're trying to figure out who's wearing the mask. Though in this case, it's not a mask. They're actually a ghost and they're actually like killing people, probably. It tells you the details that the monster needs and the monster types, which are very helpful. These are beast, breeder, collector, destroyer, devourer, so on and so forth, and each one has its own motivation. I think having monster motivations is incredibly helpful, especially since we kind of have to come up with our own as we're creating our own mysteries. And speaking of mysteries, I know I said that the built in mysteries or the pre written mysteries in this book don't have a lot of GM support, but there is a ton of GM support in terms of creating your own mysteries. There's a whole section telling you how to create your own mysteries. So I think that's worth considering for this game is that if you're just picking up this book, there's a limited number of mysteries and you're going to have to create your own. Now, there is an additional book you can get with I think like 30 additional mysteries that you can run. So that is nice to have if you don't want to create your own mysteries. I will say that in terms of not having pre-built monsters and not a lot of pre-built lore and setting, I think it makes sense because we're playing in modern day. I think it makes sense because we're playing in the modern day era and we kind of all know what that setting is because we live in it. Now let's move on to the resolution mechanic. It is PBTA, so my understanding is that all the pretty true to source PBTA games use a 2d10 plus modifier resolution mechanic. Let's go ahead and find the instructions on that. So we'll go to our act under pressure move, which was actually the most commonly used one in our session, I think. Act under pressure. So here's what a move looks like in a PBTA game. Basically, it says when you do something, roll plus some stat, and it tells you what happens based on the roll you get. On a 10 plus, you do what you set out to do. On a 7 through 9, the keeper or GM is going to give you a worse outcome, hard choice, or price to pay. And on a miss, things don't go so well. One thing I do like about this game is when you roll lower than 7, I think 6 or lower, you get an experience point, which my players were excited about. Experience points are a way to progress your character over time. And since my players really like character progression, they really enjoyed the fact that failure pushed your character forward. Now, as far as the character sheet goes, let's take a look at one of the playbooks because that's basically your character sheet. So we'll take a look at this playbook, the Mundane. So there are printable versions of this online that you can get, and it's basically a fill in the box character sheet with all the different options, and it tells you what to pick in each area. It was extremely easy to get characters rolled up. The hardest part was picking from all the cool playbooks and just deciding which one you wanted to be. But basically, you work through this playbook, tick the boxes where it tells you to, fill in any spaces, and by the end, you have a full character sheet. It also has trackers for things like luck, harm, and leveling up, the experience points that I mentioned before. There are also improvements that you can get. And I like that it basically walked the players through the character creation process itself. So it's kind of a self-contained manual and the character sheet all together. No one at my table had any trouble getting their character set up. Now, unlike some of the games I flipped through here, I have actually played this one and not just read it. And I do have some thoughts as far as pros and cons are concerned. I do think that the move framework really provides nice guidance for new players. It tells you what you can do and what the result is based on your role, which, depending on your players, can be a good thing. If they're not the type to want to kind of come up with creative actions out of nowhere, knowing that you can act under pressure or kick some butt or whatever you want to do, like seeing that list of moves as a prescriptive list is really helpful for people that might freeze up when you're like, hey, here's the situation. What do you do? At least here they have a menu to pick from and they can pick the thing they want to do and then follow the procedure that's outlined in the move. One thing I did miss was a catch-all move. Act under pressure was kind of a catch-all move, but sometimes I wanted people to roll for something, but there really wasn't a move that fit. And I think that's probably on purpose. Most likely, you really just shouldn't have players roll if there's not a move that applies. But in some cases, it would be nice to have a kind of catch-all resolution mechanic roll that wasn't a specific move, because really you cannot create a move that encompasses every single possible action a player could make. I think really act under pressure is probably that move. And again, if it's not under pressure, should they even be rolling for it? Probably not. So that's maybe more of a me thing, but it was something that I noticed. As I said before, the mysteries are very cool and I love that they're included, but they were a little difficult to run. I think sequentially, I just had a little trouble on how to get them in to the mystery, where they would encounter the various characters and threats and things like that. And it would have been nice if there was maybe a map or some kind of progression outlined. I'm not really even sure what I was missing. It just was a little difficult to flip through that mystery back and forth constantly to try to find the information I needed for the players. Some of that might be chalked up to me not being used to running prepared modules, adventures, or mysteries. A lot of times when I run games, I'm improvising most everything, so that could also be a me thing. I do think this is a difficult game to run if you don't have experience as a GM. There's a lot of heavy lifting you have to do. For instance, if somebody makes a roll and the result of that roll is that you have to give them some kind of really important information that leads them to where the monster is, that's kind of hard to come up with on the spot. Again, I'm an improv heavy GM, so it worked out, but even I had some trouble kind of fitting things together with how they got the information when they got a result like that. Sometimes it was difficult to make it jive with the state of the fiction. So I do think that there is some difficulty there. If you don't have experience, probably wouldn't recommend this as your first game to run. Now, for the final question, one I always like to look at, can you solo Monster of the Week? Well, I mean, you can solo anything, but would I solo this? I don't know. I think the moves and the player facing roles make it somewhat solo friendly, but there aren't a lot of solo tools or solo usable tools here. Like I said, there are very few, if any, rollable tables in here, and that's something I usually look for when I'm looking for a game to solo. Though it does have, like I said, the player facing roles, which is kind of one big part of the equation for me. I think if you bring your own Oracle and your own thematically appropriate custom tables, you could totally solo this, but I don't know that this would be the first one that I reach for if I'm looking for a game to solo in this particular theme. So those are my thoughts on Monster of the Week. Definitely a cool game. I love the theme. I grew up on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I've read Dresden Files, so I'm totally on board with basically everything this brings to the table. I have a few nitpicks, but who doesn't? Overall, we really enjoyed playing this, and we do plan on continuing to play it. In fact, I'm going to pick up I think it's called the Tome of Mysteries, which has, I think, 29 or 30 additional pre-made mysteries, and I'm curious to see if they get easier to run as I get experience. Now, one more thing I want to talk about before we go. I just launched rpgfeed.com, which is the companion website for this channel. I've had the domain for a while, and it was kind of a blog for a bit, but I finally decided to turn it into a feed of cool indie RPG stuff. Right now, I'm up to 57 feeds from YouTube channels, podcasts, and blogs, as well as feeds from itch.io and RPG Trader. So this basically is the thing I wanted to be able to wake up, grab my phone, and scroll through in the morning instead of news or tech-related stuff. I wanted cool RPG stuff to doom scroll through, essentially. If you also want to doom scroll cool indie RPG stuff, check out rpgfeed.com. And if you have a cool podcast, YouTube channel, or anything to submit, there's a submit link on there as well. Again, I'm Elijah, this is RPG Feed, and I'll catch you in the next one.